You ever hear a sound that stops you dead in your tracks, makes your chest tighten like the world's holding its breath? That's what it was like in Black Ridge, Tennessee, when 200 Harleys roared into town, shaking the streets, the trees, hell, even the old brick courthouse where Nate "Iron" Dawson was fighting for his life. No banners, no chants, just the low growl of engines and a wall of leather and steel that said more than any protest sign ever could. 3 days ago, Nate was just a guy pulling out of his driveway, coffee in one hand, his beat-up Chevy steering wheel in the other, the kind of morning where the mist hangs low and the world feels quiet. He's a former Marine, 2 tours in Iraq, the guy who'd carry you out of a firefight and crack a joke about your bad aim afterward. But that morning, quiet turned to chaos. Red and blue lights flashed in his rear view. 2 squad cars boxed him in before he could blink. Cops yanked his door open, shouting orders like he was some thug, not a man who'd spent years serving his country. Nate raised his hands, calm as ever, but it didn't matter. They had him face down on the asphalt, cuffs biting into his wrists, his wife, Jenny, frozen on the porch, their 10-year-old son, Tommy, clinging to her leg, eyes wide like he'd just seen his hero fall. "Charges?" Nate asked, voice steady but sharp, like a blade. The lead cop, Officer Hargrove, muttered something about aggravated assault, said an eyewitness pinned Nate to a bar fight downtown. Nate's jaw tightened. Ed hadn't been near that dive in months, hadn't thrown a punch since the sandbox. It was a setup, plain as day, but who'd listen to a guy like him in a town like Black Ridge, where the HOA and old money called the shots? Jenny's phone was out, hands shaking as she recorded, catching Hargrove's sneer as he slammed the cruiser door. That video hit the local biker group chat by noon. And let me tell you, it spread like wildfire. Veterans forums, private threads, guys who hadn't spoken in years lighting up their phones. "That's Iron Dawson," one text read. "No way he did this. We're not letting this slide." See, Nate wasn't just some rider with a Harley and a leather cut. Before the patches, before the roar of his bike, he was the Marine who dragged buddies out of burning Humvees, who stayed behind in Fallujah to make sure no one got left. You don't forget a guy like that. By nightfall, the call went out. No hashtags, no press, just a whisper in the wind. Be in Black Ridge by Thursday. Courthouse. Bring your colors. Across Tennessee, Kentucky, even as far as Ohio, engines fired up, tanks got filled, and riders who hadn't ridden together in years were suddenly texting like they were back in the same unit. Nate, sitting in a cold holding cell, had no idea the thunder was coming for him. By Wednesday, the story had legs. Nate's arrest wasn't just news, it was a detonation. That shaky phone clip from Jenny's porch hit every biker and veteran thread from Nashville to Cincinnati. "That's Iron," guys typed, over and over. "He's one of ours." And in Black Ridge, the real story started to leak out. The eyewitness. Some slick real estate developer named Carl Whitaker, who'd been gunning for Nate's land for years, ever since Nate turned down a buyout to turn his family's old farm into condos. Whitaker had pull with the HOA, the kind of guy who'd smile at you while twisting the knife, and word was he'd leaned on Hargrove to make Nate's life hell. Small-town politics, you know how it goes. Money talks, and guys like Nate get caught in the crossfire. At a truck stop in rural Kentucky, a grizzled vet named Jimmy "Hawk" Ruiz got the call. Hawk was a wiry guy, scars on his knuckles, a limp from a shrapnel wound in Mosul. His phone buzzed with the video, and he didn't need to watch it twice. "Iron's in trouble," he muttered, dialing up Big Tom, president of the Black Ridge Reapers, a local motorcycle club with a rep for loyalty over flash. "You seeing this?" Hawk asked, voice low. Big Tom, a mountain of a man with a beard like a Viking, didn't hesitate. "They think they can bury Iron? They're about to learn." By sunrise, Hawk was on his bike, leading a pack of 20 from Kentucky, while Big Tom rallied 30 more from Tennessee. Word spread to other clubs: Steel Legion from Ohio, Patriot Riders from Georgia, even lone wolves who'd hung up their colors but never forgot the code. They were coming, and Black Ridge was about to feel it. Thursday morning, Black Ridge woke to a sound like the earth itself was growling. It wasn't a parade, wasn't a festival, just 200 bikes rolling in, chrome catching the dawn, boots hitting the ground in unison. Big Tom led the Reapers from the south, his patch bowled across his back, while Hawk pulled in from the north with a mixed crew of veterans and riders, their cuts a patchwork of skulls, eagles, and old unit insignias. They parked in tight rows, engines idling low, and lined up on the courthouse steps. No signs, no shouting, just a wall of silence that weighed heavier than any riot. Locals stopped in their tracks, coffee cups forgotten, whispering, "What the hell's going on?" A deputy peeked out the courthouse window, muttering to the clerk, "You seeing this?" The clerk just nodded, lips tight. It wasn't about intimidation, it was about presence, about saying, "We're watching, and you better get this right." Inside, Nate was led from his cell, wrists cuffed, catching a glimpse through a narrow window rows of bikes, familiar faces from another life. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with something else, something he hadn't felt since the desert: brotherhood. He didn't know the half of it yet. In the courtroom, the air was thick. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ellen Price, laying out her case like she was reading a script. Nathan Dawson, a man with a history of violence, attacked an innocent bystander in a drunken rage, she said, her voice smooth, confident, like she'd already won. Nate's jaw clenched. Hadn't touched a drink in years, hadn't been near that bar. Price leaned hard on Whitaker's testimony, painting Nate as a loose cannon, a Marine who couldn't leave the war behind. Nate's lawyer, a wiry guy named Sam Kessler, stood up, buttoning his jacket like he was loading a gun. "Folks, you're about to hear two stories," he said, voice steady but with an edge. "One's built on lies and a developer's grudge. The other's built on a man's honor, his service, his sacrifice, and the truth." Sam didn't look at the windows, didn't need to. The rumble of engines seeped through the glass, low and steady, like a heartbeat. Nate kept his eyes on the table, but his mind was outside, with the brothers who'd ridden through the night for him. Then came the curveball. "The defense calls Luke Tanner," Sam said. A murmur rippled through the room. Luke wasn't on any witness list. Price shot up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is ambush litigation." The judge, a gray-haired man named Hargrovino, relation to the cop, but just as tied to Blackridge's old guard, held up a hand. "Overruled. Let's hear him." Luke stepped forward, a lanky guy in a faded jacket, face like weathered leather, eyes sharp as a hawk's. Nate knew him. Kandahar, 2008, a medic who'd patched him up after a roadside bomb. Luke took the stand, leaned into the mic, and said, "I was there that night." Nate didn't start that fight, stopped it. Luke's voice was calm, but it carried weight. He described the bar, how Whitaker's drunk buddy had shoved the owner, how Nate stepped in to break it up, only for Whitaker to point the finger when the cops showed. "Nate took the heat to protect that owner," Luke said. "And Whitaker, he slunk out the back, left Nate holding the bag." Price's pen tapped faster now, her confidence cracking. Luke glanced at the windows, at the wall of riders standing silent. "Those folks out there," he said, locking eyes with the judge, "they don't show up for just anyone. They show up for a man who's earned it." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own pulse. The judge called a recess, and as Nate was led through the courthouse's east wing, he saw them 200 strong, shoulder to shoulder across the lawn, leather cuts and veteran patches glowing in the sun. Big Tom stood front and center, arms crossed, eyes unblinking. Hawk was beside him, one boot hooked on the curb, staring like he could see through the walls. A young rider, some kid Nate didn't even know, raised 2 fingers in a quick salute. Nate nodded back, subtle, feeling the bailiff's eyes on him. "You know these people?" the bailiff asked, voice low, almost respectful. Nate's answer was simple: "They know me." Back in the courtroom, the air had shifted, like the tide turning before a storm. Price tried to rally, calling Officer Hargrove to repeat his story, but his words sounded hollow now, like he was reading lines he didn't believe. Sam didn't need to do much, just let Luke's testimony sit. Let the rumble outside do the talking. When the judge took the bench again, his eyes flicked to the windows, to the wall of loyalty that hadn't budged. "This court finds the defendant, Nathan Dawson, not guilty on all charges," he said, his gavel hitting like a thunderclap. Outside, the engines roared to life, a wave of sound that shook the windows, not wild, but controlled, like a salute. Nate stepped out, the cuffs gone, the air warm with sun and gasoline. Big Tom and Hawk met him at the steps. No hugs, no theatrics, just a handshake from Tom, firm enough to crack bone, and a nod from Hawk that said everything. "Told you we'd be here," Tom said, voice low over the rumble. Nate's throat tightened. "Yeah," he managed, "you did." The riders parted, forming a corridor down the steps, bikes revving in rhythm as Nate walked through. Veterans raised 2 fingers, bikers tipped their helmets, and Luke, leaning against his bike, gave a half-smile, like he'd known it would end this way. At the street, the engines cut off all at once, the silence heavier than the noise. Nate looked at the faces scarred, young, grizzled, all different, all bound by the same code. "I won't forget this," he said, loud enough for them to hear. Tom leaned in, voice like gravel. "We're not asking you to. Just be there when it's one of us." The bikes rolled out, 200 strong, their departure as tight as a military convoy. Nate stood there, the courthouse behind him, the open road ahead, knowing this wasn't the end. Whitaker's grudge wouldn't vanish with a verdict be back, with his HOA cronies, or worse. But Nate wasn't alone anymore. That wall of leather and steel, those brothers who'd ridden through the night, they'd be there for the next fight, and the one after that. This isn't just about Harleys or patches, it's about what happens when loyalty outweighs fear, when a man's worth isn't measured by what a small-town power broker says, but by who shows up when the chips are down. Makes you think, doesn't it? What would you do if the system came for you? If some suit with a grudge tried to bury you? Would you fight alone, or would you have people riding through the night for you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you do in Nate's boots, what you think about loyalty, justice, or the kind of grudges that tear towns apart. Hit that like button if this story got you, and subscribe to Heart Tales for more, because we've got plenty of stories about people standing up, standing together, and shaking the ground. Your next favorite's just a click away.